He walked back into that Saturday morning like a man who had nothing to hide. Brought the kids home by noon, kissed me on the cheek, asked what was for lunch. Did it every single week for over a year. What he forgot to account for was a 7-year-old with a perfect memory, zero filter, and absolutely no reason to keep his daddy's secret. By the time Adrian figured out I knew, I'd already built the whole case. He thought he was managing me. He had no idea I'd been managing him.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want you to understand something about that morning. It was ordinary, aggressively ordinary. Marcus had soccer cleats somewhere he couldn't find. Ellie was upset because her cup was the wrong color of purple. I had 3 client emails waiting and a pan of turkey bacon going, and the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee because the machine needed to be descaled, and I kept forgetting to do it. That was the backdrop. That was the moment my life split clean in 2. Marcus was 7 and ate breakfast like he was being paid by the bite. Slow, deliberate, eyes drifting around the room while his spoon moved in lazy circles through his cereal. Ellie was 5 and sat in her booster seat with a chocolate milk mustache and the satisfied look of a person who'd already won the morning. I was standing at the stove when Marcus said it. "Mom, does Dad's park friend live near us?" I kept my hand moving, turned the bacon, kept my voice easy. "What park friend, baby?" "The pretty one," Ellie offered like she was helping, "with the little hoop earrings, the silver ones. She always brings the good snacks," Marcus added. "The gummy bears, not the organic kind you pack." I set the spatula down on the spoon rest, slowly. "Tell me about this friend," I said. I turned around and leaned against the counter so I was facing them. I crossed my arms loose like we were talking about something that mattered about as much as the weather. "Do you know her name?" "Vera," Ellie said immediately. "Vera has a little girl named Lena. She's 6. She can do a real cartwheel, not a fake one." "She looks a little like Marcus," Ellie continued, reaching for her cup. "Around the nose part, doesn't she, Marcus?" Marcus shrugged the way 7-year-olds shrug, which is to say with his whole body. "I don't know. Maybe. She has the same color hair." I went back to the bacon, not because it needed attention, because my hands needed something to do that wasn't visibly shaking. Same color hair. Around the nose part. "How long has Dad been taking you to the park to see them?" I asked. Kept my voice conversational. Just a mom asking about her kid's weekend. Marcus scrunched up his face thinking. "I don't know. A long time. Since before Ellie's birthday, I think." Ellie's birthday had been 4 months ago. 4 months of Saturday mornings. 4 months of Adrian pressing a kiss to my forehead and herding the kids out the door while I caught up on work emails in my home office, thinking he was the kind of hands-on father I'd been lucky to marry. "Does Vera's little girl come to the park too?" I asked. "She's always there," Marcus said. "She and Dad push us on the swings sometimes, and Dad buys Vera the coffee from the cart, the fancy one with the whipped cream. He calls her—" He paused, thinking about it. "He calls her sweetheart." The bacon was smoking. I could smell it. I grabbed the pan and moved it off the burner, set it down on the cool side of the stove, stood there looking at the ruined strips and doing the arithmetic inside my head. Ellie swung her legs against the booster seat, heels thudding a slow rhythm. "Dad smiles different with her, Mommy. Big smiles. Like when we do something really good." "He laughs different, too," Marcus confirmed, louder. My 5-year-old and my 7-year-old had apparently noticed, during a stretch of Saturday mornings I thought were dedicated father-child bonding time, that my husband was happier with someone else than he was with me. "Can I have more juice?" Ellie asked. "Yes, baby," I said. "You can." I poured the juice. I made more bacon. I got them dressed and settled in front of a cartoon, and then I sat down at my kitchen island and stared at the window over the sink for about 6 minutes without moving. I am a crisis communications consultant. I have spent 10 years being the person Boston's most powerful executives call at 2 in the morning when their lives are imploding. Congressmen, hospital CEOs, nonprofit directors caught with their hands in the wrong places. I keep my voice level. I keep my face neutral. I find the facts before I do anything else. That training was the only reason I did not drive to Riverside Park that morning and do something I would deeply regret. Instead, I made a grocery list. I texted my sister Iris that I might need to talk later, and I pulled up my notes app and wrote down, word for word, every single thing my children had just told me. Adrian came home at 12:15 with the kids sunburned and happy and carrying a paper bag of bagels he'd stopped for. And I smiled at him and said they looked like they'd had a good morning and asked if sesame or poppy seed went better with the soup I was planning for lunch. He said sesame, always sesame, and I agreed, and he kissed my cheek. And that night, after both kids were asleep and Adrian was watching something in the den, I sat at my desk in the spare room I use as an office, and I did what I do when a client hands me a crisis. I built a timeline. Lena was 6. Marcus had said so. Ellie had confirmed it. I got out a legal pad and wrote it in columns. Lena, 6 years old, which meant she was born roughly 6 years ago, give or take a few months in either direction. 6 years ago, I was pregnant with Ellie. I wrote that down too. Pregnant with Ellie, 2nd trimester. Adrian traveling constantly. Hartford, Providence, once to Albany, for what he called a development partnership that never materialized into anything concrete. I'd been tired in a way I hadn't been with Marcus. Deeper tired, bone tired, the kind where you fall asleep watching television at 8 in the evening and wake up not knowing what day it is. He'd been so attentive that pregnancy. Brought home takeout, remembered my cravings. I'd thought it was love. I tapped my pen against the pad. Lena was born either while I was pregnant or shortly after, meaning that when I was growing Ellie, Adrian was involved with someone who was also pregnant, or he'd started this thing with Vera right after Ellie arrived, when I was in the worst 3 months of my adult life. Postpartum depression so heavy, I cried in the shower so Marcus wouldn't hear. When I was barely functioning and Adrian was supposedly exhausted from late negotiations and keeping to his side of the bed, I wrote, was she pregnant then too? Below that, I wrote, how? He was barely home. But of course that was not true. He was barely home with me. That didn't mean he was nowhere. And then there was the other thing. The thing Ellie had said so casually, the way children say things that land like a brick. She looks a little like Marcus, around the nose part. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the fact that Ellie and Marcus had my coloring. Dark brown hair, the narrow nose my mother always called the Holt nose, after her side of the family. Adrian's family ran blonde, lighter, broader featured. Both our children had come out looking like my people. If Lena had Marcus's nose, she had my family's nose. I wrote, DNA. Then I circled it twice and sat back and stared at the ceiling. That was a thought too strange to follow in any direction until I had more information. It could mean nothing. Children look like things. Kids at parks look like other kids. I closed the legal pad and put it in the locked drawer I used for sensitive client files. Then I went downstairs, poured 2 glasses of water, brought Adrian his, watched him watch television for 11 minutes, and went to bed. I lay there in the dark with my eyes open, 4 months minimum, probably longer. I thought, I need to see her in person. 1. The following Saturday, I told Adrian I had a call with a potential client, a city councilman dealing with a zoning controversy, and I needed the morning to prep materials. He nodded without looking up from his phone. No questions. No offers to rearrange. He loaded the kids into the car at 8:47. I know the exact time because I was watching from the upstairs window. I gave him 12 minutes. Then I drove to Riverside Park. I parked on the street side, facing the main entrance, in a spot partially blocked by a delivery van that had been there since I arrived. My car was unremarkable. A dark gray sedan I'd rented the night before from the airport location, paying cash from the small emergency fund I kept separate from our joint accounts. A habit from my professional life that had turned out to be prescient in ways I hadn't imagined when I started it. I did not get out. I had my phone on the seat beside me, and I waited. At 9:14, I saw them. Adrian came through the main park entrance with Marcus on one side and Ellie on the other. He was wearing a dark green jacket I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. He was laughing at something Ellie was saying. He looked relaxed in a way I realized, watching him, I hadn't seen at home in a long time. They moved toward the main playground area, and then a woman appeared from the direction of the coffee cart and walked toward them. She was maybe my age, lighter complexioned, shorter hair, wearing a yellow puffer vest over a gray long-sleeve shirt. She was carrying 2 coffees and smiling. Adrian smiled back. I want to say something about that smile. I've been studying human behavior for a decade, how people hold themselves when they're lying, when they're afraid, when they want to be somewhere else. Adrian did not look like a man who wanted to be somewhere else. He looked like a man who had arrived exactly where he was supposed to be. He took the coffee she offered. He said something. She laughed. And then a little girl came sprinting from the direction of the sandbox, pigtails flying, wearing a red jacket, and she attached herself to Marcus's arm, and the 2 of them took off toward the swings like they'd been doing it every weekend for years, because they had. I lifted my phone and I took photographs through the window, not for any particular legal reason, just because I needed proof of what I was seeing, proof I could look at later when my brain tried to convince me I had misunderstood something, that I had been wrong. I watched for 22 minutes. And here is the thing that stopped me cold, the thing that made my chest go strange and hollow in a way that had nothing to do with jealousy. At one point, Lena ran back to where Adrian and Vera were standing and grabbed Adrian's hand and pulled him toward the swings, and he went laughing, and the afternoon light caught her face in full profile, her nose. The narrow, specific, unmistakable Holt family nose that Ellie and Marcus both had, the one my mother always pointed out in family photos, there it was, on a 6-year-old girl in a red jacket in a park. Not Adrian's nose, my mother's nose. I put my phone face down on the seat and drove home. I did not confront Adrian. I want to be clear about that because a lot of people would have, and I understand why. The rage was there. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel it. But rage is a tool, and like any tool you have to pick the right moment for it, and that moment had not yet arrived. What I did instead was exactly what I do for clients. I built the file. I have a subscription to a professional background research service, the kind used by HR departments and law firms, not the kind anyone can sign up for on a Saturday afternoon. I ran Vera's last name, which I'd found on a coffee cup she'd left in Adrian's car the prior week when I'd gone looking. Vera Colton, Cambridge address, licensed nurse practitioner employed at a reproductive health clinic in Somerville, reproductive health. I wrote that down and looked at it for a while. I found her clinic's website. I found her LinkedIn, which listed her specialization as fertility and prenatal care. I found a small local article from 3 years ago in which she was quoted as an advocate for patient transparency in IVF procedures. IVF. Adrian and I had done IVF for Ellie. His idea. He'd presented it gently, carefully, framing it as a precaution because our first pregnancy had involved some early complications. Our fertility doctor, a quiet, precise man named Dr. Baines, had retrieved 4 viable embryos. We had transferred 1, which became Ellie. The remaining 3, Adrian had told me later, had not survived the storage process. That was what he had told me. Dr. Baines had since retired. I looked him up anyway. His practice had been absorbed by a larger fertility network 18 months ago. Records were in transition, the website said. For records requests, contact the main administrative office. I requested my records. Then I found something else. On the second phone. I'd known about it for weeks, had seen him check it in the car, in the bathroom, always the same pocket of his car coat. On a Thursday evening, when he went out to get the recycling bins, I slipped his coat off the hook in the mudroom and spent 60 seconds with the phone. It was password locked, but the screen notification previews were on. And in those 60 seconds, I saw enough. Message previews from a contact labeled simply V. Terms of endearment. A reference to Lena's school schedule. A message that said simply, "She asked about you again. She asked about you again." I put the phone back. I put the coat back. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bathtub for a few minutes with my hands folded in my lap. Then I called my attorney, Patricia Osi, and asked her to carve out time in her calendar. I told her I might have something complicated coming her way. Still come. The second phone was the thing that told me the most, not what was on it. I never got fully into it. What it told me was that Adrian had built this deliberately. You don't get a second phone for something casual. You don't maintain a separate communication channel, a separate schedule, a separate life for 4 years. Because that's what I was beginning to think this was, by accident or impulse. This was architecture. This was planned. I started paying attention to patterns I'd been too busy to notice before. The Tuesday evenings he had networking dinners that never seemed to produce any actual business connections. The 2 Saturday mornings per month that he took Marcus and Ellie to the park while I worked, not every week I realized, but every other week. The alternate Saturdays, I now remembered, he went to the gym alone. I started writing down when he left and when he came back, just times in a small notebook I kept in my desk drawer. I also started listening differently during dinner conversations. Adrian talked about work constantly. Commercial real estate development, permits, city contracts, partnership structures. I had spent 10 years half listening to this. Now I paid attention. And I began to notice small inconsistencies. Projects he mentioned that I'd never heard of before. A partnership with someone named Fletcher, mentioned once, then never again. Fees he referenced that didn't seem to connect to any development timeline I was aware of. I filed that away. Meanwhile, the IVF records request came back. Not the actual records. A letter saying records from that period were under administrative review following the acquisition, and to allow 6 to 8 weeks for processing. 6 to 8 weeks. I called Patricia and told her I needed to move faster than that. She told me to start gathering whatever I could find independently and bring it to her meeting. "Don't confront him," she said. "Not yet. Information first, confrontation later. You confront before you're ready and you tip your hand." "I know," I said. "I've given that exact speech." "Then follow it," she said. She had a dry sense of humor and an absolute intolerance for men who thought they were smarter than they were. I had chosen her specifically for those reasons years ago, for a client who needed exactly that combination. I was glad now I'd kept her number. Adrian's office was on the 4th floor of a glass building near the South End, and his assistant, Mrs. Cho, had worked for him for 6 years. She was a small, precise woman in her late 50s who wore her hair in a tidy bun and sent handwritten thank you notes for birthday gifts. I had always liked her without knowing her particularly well. We were the kind of cordial that exists between a man's work life and his home life. Pleasantries at the office holiday party, brief chats when I stopped in to drop something off. I ran into her at the dry cleaner 2 blocks from our building on a Wednesday morning, or I appeared to run into her. I had looked up her address through Adrian's emergency contact forms, which he kept in a folder in the filing cabinet in our home office, and I had noted that she lived close enough to use the same neighborhood dry cleaner we used. I had been there 3 mornings in a row before she appeared. "Mrs. Cho," I said warmly, "the way you greet someone you are genuinely happy to see. It's been months." It had been the office holiday party. We talked about the weather and about a restaurant nearby that had recently reopened under new management. I asked after her daughter, who was finishing nursing school. She asked after the kids. All of this was real, pleasant and unhurried. And then I said casually, "The way you mention something you think is already common knowledge." Marcus has been talking nonstop about the little girl from the park, Lena, I think her name is. He says she's practically his best friend. Mrs. Cho's hands went still on the claim ticket she'd been folding. Just for a second, but I'm trained to notice a second. "Oh," she said. "Yes. She seems like a sweet child." "Have you met her?" I asked, still casual, still just two women making conversation. She was quiet for just a beat too long. Then, "At the park once. Adrian introduced her mother as, he said they were family friends." Family friends. She said the words the way you say words when you are repeating someone else's framing and you are not sure you believe it yourself. There was something careful in her face, something she was deciding whether or not to give me. I did not push. Pushing would have closed the door. Instead, I said, "Oh, that's nice. Marcus loves having park friends. He's social like his dad." Mrs. Cho looked at me for a moment, and then she said very quietly, "Joanna, if you needed to know anything about the office scheduling, the travel calendar, I keep those records quite carefully." I held her gaze. "I appreciate that," I said. "That's good to know." We said our goodbyes, and I walked back to my car and sat there for a moment. Mrs. Cho knew something, or suspected something, and she had just told me, in the gentlest possible terms, that she was not entirely on Adrian's side. I filed that away very carefully. There was a photograph I had taken at the park, Lena running toward Adrian, face in full light. I had printed it at the pharmacy, a 4x6 glossy, and I kept it in the locked drawer with my legal pad. I looked at it on a Thursday night after Adrian had gone to bed. I had my mother's photo beside it. Not a recent one. A photo from before I was born, my mother at maybe 30, at a family picnic somewhere upstate. The narrow nose that all the Holt women had, the slight upturn at the tip, the way it sat exactly centered on a face that was otherwise unremarkable. Lena had it. I sat there with both photos for a long time, the kind of long time where you are very aware of the house settling around you and the sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Here is what I knew about our IVF process. 4 embryos retrieved. 1 transferred, successfully. That was Ellie. The other 3, Adrian had told me, had not made it through storage. He had handled the paperwork for that. I had been recovering from the transfer and then sick with early pregnancy, and then consumed by the pregnancy itself. And when he told me the others hadn't survived, I had been sad, in a distant way, but mostly I was focused on the embryo that had worked. I had never seen the storage records myself. Adrian had managed the clinic communication. He'd always been good about taking things off my plate, he said. He said it like it was love. I wrote in my legal pad, what if one of the remaining embryos was transferred to someone else? I stared at what I'd written. That was not a simple affair. That was not a man sneaking around with a woman he met somewhere. That was something else entirely. That was a crime. I was almost certain I was wrong. The thought was so large and so dark that my brain kept sliding off it, refusing to settle. It was too much. It required a level of deliberate cruelty that I could not quite make fit with the man who brought sesame bagels and coached Marcus's soccer practice. But I had learned, over 10 years of managing other people's disasters, that deliberate cruelty and ordinary charm were not mutually exclusive. Some people could hold both. Some people were very, very good at it. I wrote, request full IVF file, every page, through legal channels if necessary. Then I found a former clinic technician through a professional contact, a woman I'd worked with years ago at a hospital PR firm who now worked in medical administration and knew everyone in the Boston Fertility Network. She connected me, quietly, with a man named Gerald who had worked at the same clinic where Adrian and I had done IVF. He had left the practice 18 months prior, around the same time the records went into administrative review. He met me at a coffee shop in Brookline. He was in his mid-50s, soft-spoken, wore reading glasses on a cord around his neck. He seemed genuinely concerned when I explained what I was looking into. He told me my embryos had all been destroyed after Ellie's successful transfer. Standard protocol, he said. Documented, signed off, and then he slid a paper across the table. It was a consent form. My name on it, Joanna Hartley, and what looked like my signature on the line at the bottom, authorizing the termination of the remaining stored embryos following successful live birth. I looked at it for a long moment. It looked right. The signature looked right. I had signed hundreds of documents in that period: consent forms, insurance authorizations, prenatal paperwork, and I could not say with certainty that I had not signed this one. "This is from your records file," he said. "I kept copies of a few things when I left. Personal insurance, you understand. But if your embryos were terminated per protocol, then what you're looking into, the child, it would have to be a biological relationship through natural means." I believed him. I spent 2 weeks working from that assumption. Adrian had simply had an affair. The child looked like my family because, I told myself, children look like things. Genetics from both parents mixed in unexpected ways. The nose meant nothing. I redirected my focus. I told Patricia I was looking at simple adultery. She began preparing the divorce filing on that basis. I retained a private investigator to document Adrian's ongoing contact with Vera for the purpose of the divorce proceedings. And then, on a Sunday afternoon, I was going through the filing cabinet in Adrian's home office looking for the car insurance renewal. And I found a folder I had never seen before, tucked behind a hanging file labeled Miscellaneous, Contracts. Inside was a single page, a billing statement from the clinic, dated 6 years ago. At the bottom, under Services Rendered, a line item I had to read 3 times: donor embryo transfer preparation and facilitation fee. Not termination, not destruction, transfer. I sat down on the floor of his office with that paper in my hands. My legs had simply stopped working. The PI, the divorce prep, the 2 weeks of redirected investigation, all of it built on Gerald's careful, convincing lie. I thought about Gerald and his reading glasses and the consent form with my signature on it. I wondered how much Adrian had paid him. I wondered how long that particular insurance policy had been in place. I took the billing statement. I photographed it from every angle. I texted Patricia, "Disregard last direction. New evidence. Call me tonight." Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it and went downstairs to start dinner. Let me tell you about the night I played the first card. I want to be precise about something. I did not play the full hand. I played one card, just enough to watch his face. I made Adrian's favorite dinner on a Tuesday: pan-seared salmon with capers and a butter sauce, roasted asparagus, a bottle of Sancerre I'd been keeping in the back of the wine rack. The kids were at my sister Iris's for the night. I'd arranged that a week in advance. Adrian came home from work and said, "This smells incredible," and hung up his coat and poured himself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen island while I finished plating. He talked about a permit issue with a development project in Dorchester. I listened and asked questions and moved the salmon onto the plates with steady hands. We sat down. We ate. I let him talk for 10 minutes. And then, between one bite and the next, I said, "Adrian, how long have you been seeing Vera?" The fork stopped. Not a dramatic freeze, just a fraction of a second, a tiny catch in the movement. Then he set the fork down carefully on the edge of the plate. His face went through several things at once. I watched it happen. Denial was first. I could see him assembling it. Then calculation. How much do I know? Where did this come from? What is the minimum I have to admit to? Then, underneath that, something that looked almost like relief, which told me he had been carrying the weight of the secret for a long time, and some part of him was tired. "Joanna, I've known for a few weeks," I said. "I just want to understand how long." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "About 2 years. The kids have been meeting her at the park for 4 months," I said. "At least." He had the grace to look down at his plate. "Yes. Is she in love with you?" I don't know. It's complicated." I took a sip of wine. "You said that like you rehearsed it." Something flickered in his face. "Joanna, I know there's nothing I can say that makes this okay. I wasn't planning for it to I'm not asking you to explain it, I said. I'm asking you to be honest with me about the scope of it. He talked for about 20 minutes. He was careful. He admitted to the affair, minimized the timeline a little, framed Vera as someone he'd met through a colleague, emphasized that he loved our family. He never once mentioned Lena, not a word, not a syllable. I watched him describe a 2-year affair in which the other woman apparently had no children, no daughter in a red jacket, no little girl who ran toward him at the park and grabbed his hand. I sat across the table, and I let him talk. When he was done, he looked at me with the expression of a man who believes he has managed a difficult situation, contained it, reduced it to a shape he could control. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and I picked up my fork and finished my salmon. Yee. In the days after the salmon dinner, Adrian was attentive in the performative way of a man who knows he is in trouble and is attempting damage control. Flowers appeared on the kitchen counter, not my favorites, which are ranunculus or simple white tulips, but a large mixed arrangement from the grocery store, the kind men buy when they have not paid enough attention to know what their wife actually likes. He made the coffee in the mornings. He offered to handle the school pickups. He suggested couples therapy with the name of a therapist he'd apparently already looked up, which told me he'd been planning for this conversation longer than I'd let myself believe. He also made the second phone disappear. I noticed it on Thursday morning. His coat on the hook in the mudroom, the breast pocket flat and empty. He'd deleted or disposed of it, which meant he believed the problem was contained now. That I knew about the affair, that he had made his careful partial confession, and that we were now in the repair phase of a manageable marriage crisis. He thought he was running damage control. He had no idea that I had spent 6 years of professional life learning exactly how men like him operated when they thought they were managing a situation. The flowers, the attentiveness, the preemptive therapy suggestion. I'd seen the playbook, I'd written case studies on the playbook. What he didn't know, what I was careful not to let him know, was that I was now operating on 2 separate tracks. Track 1 was the marriage. I let him believe track 1 was the only track. I agreed to look at the couple's therapy name. I said I needed time to process. I was civil and quiet and sad in the way that seemed appropriate for a wife who has just learned her husband has been unfaithful, and nothing about my behavior suggested I was doing anything other than grieving. Track 2 was the billing statement. I had the document. I had photographed it. I had also, very carefully, using a work computer at my office so it would not show in our home network history, begun researching unauthorized embryo transfer, what it constituted legally, who had jurisdiction, what the federal statutes looked like. The answer, it turned out, was significant. Unauthorized transfer of a biological sample, specifically reproductive material, without the documented consent of the genetic source, was a federal matter, not a civil divorce matter, a criminal one. I made an appointment with a reproductive law attorney Patricia had recommended. Her name was Dr. Veronica Walsh, and she had done more unauthorized reproductive transfer cases than anyone else in New England. I did not tell Adrian about this appointment. I told him I had a client lunch. He said, "Have a good time." He was still smiling when I left. I am going to tell you about the worst 48 hours of the whole thing. Because up until this point, I had been building something solid, and then it was gone. My contact at the medical records firm, a woman named Dana who I had worked with on a client case involving malpractice documentation, came through faster than I expected. She called me on a Wednesday and said she'd been able to access the original intake records from the IVF clinic through a secondary archive that had not been folded into the acquisition's digital transfer. She said it was not clean, it was partial, but what she had was significant. I drove to her office that afternoon. She spread 3 pages across her desk, clinic intake forms, billing summary, and, the most important piece, An internal transfer notation, a handwritten note on clinic letterhead, dated 6 years ago, that referenced the preparation of a secondary embryo transfer. The notation listed a patient code, a procedure date, and a facilitating physician, not Dr. Baines's name, a different name I didn't recognize. The billing statement I'd found in Adrian's files was the financial side of this. The notation was the clinical side. Together they were, as Dana said, a significant start. I photographed everything with my phone, close up, multiple angles, full pages. Then I emailed all 12 photos to myself and to Patricia with a note, "Evidence of secondary transfer. Call me urgent." I drove home. That evening, Adrian had a late dinner meeting. One of his real ones, I think, because Mrs. Cho had confirmed it on the calendar she'd quietly given me view-only access to. I ate with the kids, did bath time, got them to bed, and then I sat down at my desk to pull up the email I'd sent and forward it to Dr. Walsh. The email was gone. Not moved to another folder, not filtered to spam. Gone. The sent version gone too. I checked my phone. The photos were still there. I checked the email again. Nothing. I called Patricia. She said she had received my note about urgent evidence, but the attachments had never come through. Just empty attachment placeholders. No files. I called Dana. She did not answer. I called her again the following morning. She picked up, and her voice was careful. She said she needed to let me know that the materials she had accessed were being reviewed as part of an ongoing compliance audit, and she could not make them available to outside parties at this time. She was sorry. She couldn't say more. She was reading from a script. I could hear it in the flatness of her delivery, the formal words that did not sound like Dana at all. Someone had gotten there first. I thought about Adrian finding my email password. Not a hard thing for a man who had lived in the same house for 10 years and watched me log in on shared devices more times than either of us could count. I had used the same base password for years, rotating a number at the end. He had figured it out. He had accessed my account and deleted the sent files, and then, or before, he had contacted someone at Dana's firm and applied pressure. I sat at my desk with the 12 photos still on my phone and absolutely no supporting documentation from a credible source. Patricia said, "Don't panic. We find another route." I said, "I know," but my hands were shaking when I put the phone down. I backed up the phone photos to an external drive and put the drive in my car, in the spare tire well, in a zippered bag. Not in the house, not on any network Adrian could reach. Then I changed every password I had. Every single one. My neighbor Simone moved into the brownstone 2 doors down a little over a year before all of this happened. I had found her watchful in a way that registered as slightly off-putting. She noticed things. The way she'd mentioned casually that my recycling had gone out a day early, or that she'd seen someone on the block she hadn't recognized. She kept particular hours, was rarely home in the evenings, and had once told me she used to work in family court investigations without elaborating further. I had chalked her up as one of those neighbors who is perfectly pleasant and a little unknowable. The kind you wave to but don't share wine with. The Thursday evening after I lost the documentation, I was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of tea going cold beside me, trying to figure out what my second route actually looked like when there was a knock at my front door. It was Simone. She was holding a small foil pan. "I made too much lasagna," she said, "and I want to talk to you if you have a few minutes." I let her in. We sat at the kitchen island and she set the lasagna down and did not pretend we were there to discuss dinner. "I'm going to say something," she said, "and I want you to tell me if I'm overstepping, because I might be." "Say it," I said. "I've been watching your house for about 3 weeks." She said it matter-of-factly, no apology in it. Not in a strange way, in a, "I used to do this for a living" way, and I think you're in the middle of something. I looked at her for a long moment. "What tipped you off?" "The rental car," she said. and the way you're always home until a specific time on Saturday mornings before you leave in a hurry, and the man with the briefcase who came to your door on a Tuesday afternoon while Adrian was at work. She paused. That was a process server or a paralegal. I used to work with both. I almost laughed. You were a family court investigator. For 14 years, she said. I retired 18 months ago. She folded her hands on the counter. 3 years ago, I worked a case involving a fertility clinic in Somerville. Patient rights dispute that got settled quietly. Too quietly, in my opinion. The clinic had a physician on staff who was, let's say, flexible about consent documentation. The case never went anywhere because the injured party took a settlement and signed an NDA. I always thought there was more to it. She slid a card across the counter. A name on it. Not a clinic name, just a name and a phone number. This is a forensic document analyst who does reproductive fraud cases. He has worked with the FBI field office here, and he knows how to reconstruct deleted digital records without a cooperating source. I picked up the card. Why are you doing this? Simone was quiet for a second. Then she said, I watched a man bury a case because he had money and connections, and the woman on the other side didn't. I have thought about that case every week for 3 years. She stood up. The lasagna needs about 25 minutes at 350 if it's still cold. She let herself out. I sat there holding the card, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something other than the sick weightlessness of losing ground. I felt like I had a floor again. Simone's document analyst was named Ray, and he operated out of an office above a print shop in Jamaica Plain that smelled like toner and old coffee. He was in his 60s, former FBI, with the dry, unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades seeing the worst of what people did to each other with paper. I brought him everything I had, the billing statement photograph, the 12 phone photos of Dana's documents, the research I'd done on the clinic, and the physician's name from the transfer notation. He spread it all out on a light table and looked at it without speaking for several minutes. The digital deletion is recoverable, he said. If he accessed your email through a browser, there's a metadata trail. It won't give us the emails back, but it will confirm who accessed them and when. That's admissible corroboration. And the original documents? Dana's firm operates on a cloud archive system. Deletion from the front end doesn't clear the archive. There are legal channels for accessing that archive. They're slow, but a reproductive law attorney filing on federal grounds can move them faster than standard discovery. He referred me to Dr. Walsh, which confirmed Simone's recommendation. And he had one more thing. The physician in the transfer notation, he said, pointing at one of my photos. He lost his license 4 years ago. Practice fraud. Overbilling, forged insurance authorizations. He is currently the subject of an ongoing federal investigation. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Which means the U.S. Attorney's Office already has an open file on this man. And they would very much like to know what else he was doing with his prescription pad. I went to Patricia that afternoon and told her to start a joint filing with Dr. Walsh. Not divorce. Not yet. Federal disclosure first through the reproductive law channel to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the state medical board simultaneously. And then there was the DNA question, which still needed answering. I went to the park. Not a Saturday, a Wednesday afternoon. I went early before the post-school crowd, and I watched the sandbox area where Marcus had said Lena usually played. After about 20 minutes, a nanny arrived with 2 children, one of whom was Lena. I recognized her immediately from my photographs. I sat on a bench nearby for 40 minutes. I watched her play. I watched her take her jacket off and leave it on the bench beside me when she chased the other child to the swings. I sat there for 2 more minutes. Then I carefully, gloved hand, small evidence bag that Ray had provided, lifted 2 hairs from the collar of the jacket. Lena came back for the jacket. I handed it to her. I told her it was a pretty color red, and she said thank you and ran off. I drove to the lab Ray had directed me to. I provided my own sample from a cheek swab the lab technician performed on site. The text said results would be available in 5 to 7 business days. 7 days is a long time when you are waiting to find out something like that. I went to work. I handled 3 client situations: a state senator managing backlash from a budget vote, a hospital executive navigating a staff complaint that had gone public, a tech founder whose company had a data issue they wanted contained. I did all of this competently. I sat in conference rooms and said the right things and gave the right advice, and then I drove home and made dinner and helped Marcus with his reading homework, and read to Ellie and kissed Adrian's cheek when he came in late on Tuesday and said he'd grabbed something to eat, and I slept 7 hours a night and did not say a single word out of place. On the 7th morning, I was in the parking garage beneath my office building, engine off, phone in my hand, when the email from the lab came through. I read the subject line: Maternity test results. Hartley. I opened it. The report was clinical, precise, the kind of document that exists to eliminate ambiguity. It listed the sample identifiers, the test methodology, the comparison markers. At the bottom, under conclusion, a single sentence. The tested samples indicate a biological maternal relationship with a probability of 99.8%. Lena was my daughter, not Adrian's daughter with Vera. My daughter. My embryo, implanted in Vera without my knowledge or consent, carried and born and raised by a woman who, as far as I could tell, had been told an elaborate lie about where that embryo came from. I sat in that parking garage for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the time on my phone. I think about what I felt during those 22 minutes, and I find it is genuinely difficult to describe. It wasn't grief exactly, though grief was in it. It wasn't rage, though that was in it too. It was something closer to vertigo. The floor shifting, the understanding that the entire architecture of my adult life had been built on a structure I had not known was there, and that structure had been designed by someone I had shared a bed with for 10 years. He had taken my daughter, not through an affair, not through an accident, through a deliberate arrangement with a clinic, a physician who had since lost his license, and a woman who had been told God knows what to make her agree to carry a stranger's embryo. I sat there until the vertigo settled into something cold and steady. Then I called Patricia. I said, "The results came back. She's mine." Patricia was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Okay, we move now." Moving means different things to different people. To Patricia, it meant phone calls, filing deadlines, carefully worded legal documents. To me, it meant standing in my kitchen that evening, watching Adrian put the kids to bed, and understanding that within 48 hours, his entire constructed life was going to come apart, and that I had built the mechanism, and that I had been ready to pull the lever for a while now. Patricia filed the next morning. Not for divorce, not yet. The first filing was a report to the state medical board regarding the unauthorized embryo transfer, supported by the billing statement photograph, the reconstructed email metadata from Ray's work, and the DNA results. Simultaneously, Dr. Walsh filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office, attaching the same evidence packet plus her analysis of the relevant federal statutes on non-consensual reproductive material use. She also filed a civil action naming Adrian, the licensed revoked physician from the clinic, and the clinic's former ownership entity. Adrian was served at his office at 2:15 on a Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Cho witnessed it. She told me so herself in a text message she sent 40 minutes later. Short, precise. He was served today at 2:15. He went very pale. I thought you should know. I texted back, "Thank you, Mrs. Cho. I mean that." She replied with a single word, "Good." Within 24 hours, things began to move fast in a way that surprised even Patricia, who had expected slower bureaucratic progress. What we hadn't fully accounted for was that the U.S. Attorney's Office already had an open file on the disgraced physician, the one whose name appeared in the transfer notation. When Dr. Walsh's filing landed on the relevant desk, it did not land in an empty inbox. It landed on top of an existing investigation into that physician's conduct at multiple practices over a decade. Adrian's financial arrangement with him fit neatly into a pattern that federal investigators had been trying to complete for 2 years. Adrian's real estate business was also, it turned out, not quite what it appeared to be. I had noticed the inconsistencies in his project descriptions over dinner conversations. The investigators noticed much more significant ones in his financial records: permit fees billed to development clients that had never been filed with the city, partnership agreements structured to move money in ways that had nothing to do with the stated projects. The financial fraud and the reproductive fraud were separate crimes, but the same person had committed both of them, and the investigators found that very interesting. I was told all of this by Patricia over 2 phone calls that week. I was standing in my laundry room both times, folding the kids' things, because the laundry room was the one place in the house where I could talk quietly without either child appearing at my elbow. The day Adrian was officially notified that the federal investigation had expanded to include his business practices, he came home and sat at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. I made tea. I set it beside him. I said nothing. He looked up at me after a long moment. "You did this," he said. It wasn't accusatory exactly. It was almost bewildered, like he had not believed until this moment that I was capable of it. "I found out what you did," I said. "Everything you did." He was quiet. "Lena," I said, and I watched his face change. That was the moment. Not the salmon dinner, not the service papers at the office. That was the moment he understood what I knew. His expression collapsed in a way I had never seen on him before. Not guilt exactly, but the expression of a man who has been found out completely and has nothing left to manage. He said, "I can explain." "No," I said, "you can't." I picked up my tea and went to check on the kids. I want to tell you about meeting Vera, because she is part of this story in a way that is not simple. Dr. Walsh arranged it on neutral ground, a conference room at a legal office in Cambridge, 6 weeks after the filings. Vera had retained her own attorney. She'd been interviewed by federal investigators twice. She was cooperating fully, which is how we found out the details that filled in the parts of the story I hadn't been able to reconstruct on my own. I did not know what I expected when I walked into that room. I think I expected someone calculating, someone who had understood what she was involved in and chosen it anyway. Vera was sitting at the far end of the conference table with her hands folded, and she looked like a woman who had not been sleeping well for weeks. She started talking before anyone had even settled into their chairs, not defensively, more like she'd been waiting a long time to say it. She told me Adrian had approached her about 8 years ago at the Fertility clinic where she worked as a nurse practitioner. He had presented himself as a client, which was technically true. I was his patient. He accompanied me to some early appointments. He had been charming, which I could not argue with. He had told her over the course of several months that his marriage had ended, not separated, ended, and that he and his ex-wife had agreed to a surrogacy arrangement using a frozen embryo, but that his ex-wife had changed her mind at the last moment and declined to be involved further. He had produced documents, forged consent forms, not the one Gerald had shown me, a different set, more detailed, more convincingly constructed. He had been thorough. He had told Vera that the embryo was biologically both his and his former wife's, that the former wife had signed over all parental rights, and that he was looking for a gestational carrier who would be willing to carry the pregnancy and relinquish the child to him. He had told her he was in love with her. He had told her this was about building a family together. She believed him. She carried Lena and handed her over at birth, and she and Adrian had raised her together, except that the life they'd built was layered on top of another life, the one he'd apparently never ended, the one with me and Marcus, and the house in the South End and the Saturday morning pancakes. Vera found out about me the same week I found out about her, through the federal investigators who had interviewed her and shown her photos. She found out she had been carrying another woman's child, not an anonymous donor, not a consented arrangement, but a stolen embryo from a woman who had no idea she existed. She found out the man she'd believed in for 8 years was a liar, in a way that was hard to even fully comprehend. She looked at me across that conference table and she said, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't cover it. I know it doesn't come close. But I need you to understand that I would never have—" Her voice broke. I looked at her for a long moment, and I thought about what it would mean to carry a child for 9 months and love her for 6 years, and then have the whole story rewritten under your feet, to find out you were a prop in someone else's deception. Vera was not my enemy. "I know," I said. "I believe you." Her attorney exhaled. We sat in that conference room for another hour. Vera answered every question from both legal teams, fully, without evasion. She gave them bank records, text history, every document Adrian had ever given her. She described conversations in enough detail that her memory would hold up in court. She was not the villain. She was as much a casualty as anyone. I did not forget that. There is a particular quality to watching someone's constructed world come apart at a bureaucratic pace. It is not dramatic. It is paperwork and phone calls and legal notices and status updates from Patricia. But it is thorough. And thoroughness is, in my experience, far more satisfying than drama. Adrian's attorney attempted 3 things in rapid succession over the following 6 weeks. He attempted to challenge the DNA evidence. The lab's methodology was reviewed and confirmed. He attempted to argue that the billing statement was taken out of context. The federal investigators found 9 additional billing documents in the clinic's archive that provided extensive context. He attempted to negotiate a civil settlement that would have allowed Adrian to avoid criminal prosecution in exchange for financial compensation to me. Patricia's response to that last one was short. She said no. The federal charges were filed in late autumn. Unauthorized transfer of reproductive material without consent, and 3 counts of wire fraud related to his real estate practice. His attorney advised him to accept a plea agreement rather than go to trial, which was, in Patricia's view, and she was not wrong, the smart play given the weight of the documented evidence against him. Adrian accepted the plea. He was sentenced to 4 years in a federal facility with 2 additional years of supervised release. His real estate licenses were permanently revoked. The assets connected to the fraudulent business dealings were seized. His business partners, some of whom had known about the questionable permit billing and said nothing, were navigating their own legal situations. I did not follow those closely. I had enough to attend to. Mrs. Cho called me the day the sentence was announced. She wasn't calling to gloat. That wasn't her way. She called to say that she hoped the kids were okay and that if I needed anything, she was nearby. I thanked her. I meant it. Simone came over that evening with another foil pan, shepherd's pie this time, and she sat at my kitchen island and we drank wine from the rack and she said, "How are you?" And I thought about it honestly and said, "I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay." She nodded. "Good," she said, "because the next part is the hard one." She was not wrong about that either. The family court process took 5 months. I am not going to walk you through all of it because it was dense and procedural and involved more paperwork than I have generated in 10 years of professional crisis management. What I will tell you is that Dr. Walsh navigated it with the same focused competence she brought to everything, and that the DNA evidence was determinative, and that Vera's full cooperation, her willingness to support the transfer of custody while maintaining a supervised relationship with Lena, made the process faster than it might otherwise have been. I will also tell you that the hardest part of those 5 months was not the legal process. It was Marcus. Marcus had known Lena from the park. He had swung on swings next to her and traded snacks and run around the jungle gym and thought of her, in the uncomplicated way of children, as a park friend. When I sat him down carefully, age-appropriately, and explained that Lena was going to come live with us, that she was in fact his sister, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So she was at the park all along and we didn't know?" "That's right," I said. He thought about this. "That's weird," he said finally, "but also kind of cool." I laughed, actually laughed, the first real laugh in months. "Yeah," I said, "it kind of is." Ellie took it more literally. She asked if Lena could share her room. I said we would figure out the room situation together. Ellie accepted this and immediately began planning the stuffed animal allocation. Lena arrived on a Saturday morning in early spring. That is not a detail I chose deliberately, but it is not lost on me. A Saturday morning in spring, full circle. She came with one rolling suitcase in navy blue, a stuffed rabbit with a missing ear named Benny, and a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket that she showed me shyly when she came through the door. It was a drawing Marcus had made her, at the park months ago, before any of us knew what any of this meant. A drawing of 2 stick figures on a swing set. He had written his name at the bottom in 7-year-old handwriting. She had kept it. I held it together. I am going to be clear about that. I smiled and said it was a great drawing, and Marcus turned red the way he does when he's proud of something and pretending he's not. That first evening, we ordered pizza and ate it on the living room floor because Lena said she'd never eaten pizza on the floor before, and Ellie found this so astonishing she immediately demanded we make it a rule. Nobody made a speech. Nobody cried. Or at least nobody cried in front of the children. Marcus showed Lena the TV remote and explained the channel numbers with the focused authority of someone who has been waiting for someone to teach. Ellie gave Lena the blanket from the back of the couch. The soft gray one she normally guarded like a small territorial animal, and presented it without comment, like it was simply the obvious thing to do. I sat on the floor with my 3 children and watched them settle into each other the way children do, with no weight of history and no awareness of what it had cost to get here. And I thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. Later, after they were all asleep, I stood in the hallway outside their rooms for a few minutes just listening to the quiet breathing of the house. 3 kids. My kids. The vertigo was gone. Something else had settled in its place. Not peace, exactly. We had months of adjustment ahead, of therapy appointments and school transitions and hard conversations. But something solid. Something real. I went to bed at 10:30 and I slept through until morning for the first time in 5 months. 1 year out, on a Saturday morning in November, I was standing in my living room watching my 3 children argue companionably about a blanket fort. The light through the bay windows had that particular November quality. Lower, golden, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they deserve to be remembered. Marcus was 14 months into being a big brother to 2 younger sisters and had discovered he was, apparently, better at this role than any of us had expected. He was patient with Lena in a way that had developed naturally, almost without anyone noticing, the way children grow into themselves when you give them the space to do it. Ellie had decided, sometime in the past few months, that she was in charge of the family's creative direction. She directed the fort building, the game scenarios, the holiday decorations, and the seating arrangements at movie night with equal confidence and zero irony. Lena had taken to this with something that looked like relief, the ease of having someone else be loudly certain about things, when your own first 6 years had involved rather a lot of uncertainty. Lena had been in therapy since she arrived, a pediatric specialist named Doctor. Kim, who worked out of an office in Brookline with a waiting room full of picture books and a remarkable ability to make 6-year-olds feel safe enough to say what they were actually thinking. Dr. Kim had told me, at our 3-month check-in, that Lena was adjusting better than the statistical norms for her situation. I said that was good to hear. Dr. Kim said it was more than good. She said, "You did the hard things right." I thought about that a lot. Adrian was in a federal facility in Connecticut serving out his sentence. I did not discuss this with the children beyond age-appropriate explanations. Daddy made some bad choices. Daddy has to go away for a while. Daddy still loves you even from far away. I believed the last part was true. I also believed it did not excuse anything. Both things could be true. I held them both without needing to resolve them. Vera came to Ellie's birthday party in October. She sat in the backyard with a cup of lemonade and watched the kids do the cake and the singing, and Lena ran to her when she arrived and hugged her hard. Lena called her Auntie Vera now, a title that had emerged from Lena herself in a session with Dr. Kim when she was trying to figure out what the categories meant. Auntie Vera was not Mommy. Mommy was me. But Auntie Vera had loved her, and that mattered, and Lena was, at 7, already working out the complicated math of that with more grace than most adults could manage. Vera cried quietly in the backyard at one point, behind her sunglasses, while the kids chased each other with water guns. I went and sat beside her, and we didn't say anything. We were both there. That was enough. Simone had become something I would not have predicted, a genuine fixture in the household. She had a key now and a standing Friday dinner invitation and a habit of arriving with useful things, good wine, better lasagna, and the kind of company that doesn't require you to perform being fine when you're not quite there yet. My sister Iris had moved closer, into a sublet 3 blocks away, with the stated intention of staying through the end of the school year and the unstated intention of not going anywhere. She and Simone made dinner together on the evenings I had late client calls, and I could hear them talking and laughing in the kitchen from my office, and it did not feel like intrusion. It felt like the kind of household I had not known I was allowed to want. That Saturday in November, I got a text from a potential new client, a tech CEO with a harassment situation that was about to go public, the kind of thing I could manage in my sleep at this point. I looked at the text and smiled a little to myself because crisis management was still crisis management, and I was still good at it, and my professional life had not collapsed under the weight of my personal one. I had wondered, in the worst months, if it would. I set the phone face down on the side table. "Mom," Marcus called from inside the fort. "Are you playing or just watching again?" "I'm coming," I called back. I took off my shoes and ducked through the blanket door and sat cross-legged on the floor of the Fort Kingdom with my 3 kids, and Ellie immediately assigned me the role of the wise advisor to the princess, and I accepted the title, and Lena pressed a plastic crown onto my head with great seriousness. The house was warm. The kids were loud. Iris and Simone were making something in the kitchen that smelled like garlic and butter. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the quiet living room with the last inch of wine in my glass, and the house settling around me the way houses do. Outside, the city moved through its endless Saturday night rhythms, cars passing, distant music, Boston breathing. I had spent 10 years being the person other people called when their lives fell apart. I knew the architecture of disaster better than almost anyone I had ever met. I knew how to map the exposure, contain the damage, build the narrative that would hold. I had not known, until this year, how to do that for myself. Some women find out about the double life through a message on a phone, or a receipt in a coat pocket, or a suspicion that finally becomes a certainty. I found out through my 7-year-old asking a question about a pretty lady at the park in a sunny kitchen on an ordinary Saturday morning, while his bacon burned on the stove. That question had led to uncovering medical fraud, financial fraud, a stolen embryo, and a daughter I had not known was mine. Adrian was in federal prison. The clinic physician who had facilitated what he did had lost his license and was facing his own charges. The false paperwork, the second phone, the careful architecture of the lie, all of it had come apart under the weight of documentation, determination, and a neighbor with a foil pan of lasagna and a very particular set of skills. Lena was asleep down the hall in a bedroom she'd spent 2 weeks decorating with craft paper stars and a string of little lights. She had a favorite cereal now and a best friend at school named Priya, and a stuffed rabbit with a missing ear who had his own shelf above her bed. She was mine. She had always been mine. I had just had to find my way to her. I finished my wine and set the glass down on the table. I'm Joanna Hartley. I manage crises for people who cannot manage them alone. I am good at it and I have worked hard at it, and I am not apologetic about either of those things. But the most important case I ever worked was my own. And I didn't just survive it. I brought my daughter home. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below. Even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.